Yeah. Yeah. No. There we go.
Identity politics, right? How they use identity politics.
I know Pakistan is one of the top receivers traditionally of like U.S. military aid. Like the U.S. has had a big influence inside your country.
They bully other countries. With all their petrodollars, USA government says that what big a threat Iran is if Iran has nuclear power. But the major issue is that the major threat the world faces is with USA having nuclear powers, right?
US academia has a huge influence on academia around the world. Like I know, for example, in India, like you can't talk about Kashmir.
So much capitalist, their mindset have become so much oligarchic capitalist. They have lost the moral legitimacy in the world, right? This is what we argue. This is what we as academics can offer to the world.
I would rather the United States spend money on, building up good infrastructure and a healthy society, and instead of doing wars around the world. When you look in old manuscripts and things, they don't talk about black and white and brown and yellow, and so this understanding around race was really constructed during the rise of liberalism and capitalism, and dividing people up into different groups.
Because there have been only two civilizations that have actually challenged America in the past. One has been the Russians, the Soviets, and the other have been the Muslim civilization. On Pakistan, I would just say that America is oscillating between Pakistan army and the Pakistan major political parties. Always do that. Let them both fight each other so that we can control them. You wrote about Haiti, exact same issue, right?
Yep. That's the plan around the planet. They keep repeating it.
So I would actually like to first introduce you, PhD in sociology from University of California, right?
Yeah.
I'll start it like this, that the main thing that I liked about you was the academic bravery that you possessed at that time. The academic bravery, which is so much lacking in in the entire world at the moment. If people like yourself didn't confront those people 2-3 years back, we wouldn't have seen the momentum that we have gained on the Gaza issue in this time right now. So I will give a lot of credit to you. And would you like to describe how that went when you went to George W. Bush and confronted him? And I would like you to highlight on this academic bravery thing, that how can we develop academic bravery among the academics in our institution?
Well, thanks for having me, Maz. I really appreciate it. We're living right now in a very difficult time. I'm seeing every day the killing fields in Gaza, and it's just horrific. Just this week in the U.S., we had Netanyahu visit Congress, and everyone's clapping. There was one Congresswoman, Rashid Tlaib, who was brave and had her sign calling him a war criminal guilty of genocide. I think Code Pink went and wished her happy birthday in her office and celebrated her. And but yeah, I've just I think the people in history that have sort of stood up when injustice is going on, when wars are being started in their names, and those are the people that have always inspired me, and why I got into doing academia, just like that I could study these things and write about them. And I have a lot of family members who were in the U.S. military and had very bad experiences. Like my dad was in the Vietnam War and became a conscientious objector and had been tortured when he refused to fight in Vietnam. And then my cousin was in the Iraq War, and he was briefly in Kosovo as well, and just saw a lot of really, he should have never been there. Psychologically, it was very destructive on him, and just led him into a lot of problems after leaving the military, with drugs and jail and all sorts of things. So yeah, so when Bush came to talk at where I was living at the time,
and this was one of the reasons of confronting him, right? Because this was so much of past history of so much deaths and so much of American people who served for American military. They served so many deaths as well, right?
Yeah, and also that week, that was right when the whole occupation of Afghanistan, the illegal occupation, was collapsing. And when the U.S. troops pulled out, you saw how unpopular and what a joke that whole thing was, and how it collapsed, within like a week, the whole thing fell apart, and they couldn't just hold it together with money. And so it was interesting because a lot of the people, like the police officers that arrested me when I shouted down Bush, maybe you can show the video.
Yeah, I have it actually.
Yeah. And there was another guy named Michael Preissner. He also shouted down Bush like the day before I did.
Yep.
So Bush had two different talks, and we called it his West Coast warmonger tour because he was doing tours on the West Coast of the United States.
Yeah, I think we can see the video together maybe.
Yes. No. No, okay. Now, sir, this is not the time. This is not the time for that, sir. Yes. No. No, it is disrespectful to the audience. Yeah. No. There we go.
That's okay. Here's the thing in America. The good news is, in other countries, the guy would end up in jail for yelling at a president. Here he's allowed to express himself, and I want to apologize for...
Yeah, and I think that's really that's brilliant. And even the last part that Bush was saying, I mean, you have wrote so much about identity politics, right? How they use identity politics. And they use these words. Oh, it's democracy. It's the beauty of democracy that people like you can even shout at us. And so they use these kind of. And I've read all about this stuff, that if you speak for Syria, they'll call you Assadist. If you speak for Iraq, they'll call you supporter of Saddam Hussein. If you speak, right now you speak for Palestinians, now they are saying you are with Hamas terrorists. Netanyahu yesterday called, if you support Iran, then you are useful idiots. So they invent all these kind of languages, and you have, I think, done a terrific job in this as well.
Yeah. Well, it's ridiculous because, I mean, I'm not Syrian. I've never been to Syria. I've never been to Gaza. So how could I be Hamas or an Assadist? I mean, I don't even know, the details of the charters of those organizations or parties. So if you come out and you oppose U.S. sanctions on a country, or you oppose the sending of weapons, for Israel to use on Gaza, or you oppose, the sanctions on Syria that block the country from the SWIFT system, from financial, being able to do trade, buy resources on the international market. I mean, which is a punishment of the civilian population.
Yep.
We know this from a long history of U.S. economic warfare on so many countries, in South America and Central America and the Caribbean, the Middle East and Africa. So, yeah, everything, I mean, you see this sort of, and you see this in the US and in so many other places in liberal politics, that everything is reduced to kind of surface level, this kind of like mantra over and over again about, respectability and legitimacy and, the liberal world order and all these things.
Yep.
But it's just like a charade. I'm not like an expert at all in Pakistan, but I'm sure there in your country, there's a lot of similar things.
We'll get into that.
Pakistan,
Yeah.
I know Pakistan is one of the top receivers traditionally of like U.S. military aid. Like the U.S. has had a big influence inside your country, right? With money and intelligence agencies and yeah, all sorts of things.
Yeah, I'll move on to Pakistan, but I want to stick to, a few questions.
You can educate me.
Yeah, I'll move on to Pakistan in the end, because Pakistan and India, I think we can talk together briefly on that in the end.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that Pakistan and India need to be friends, but the United States doesn't like that. United States would never want Pakistan and India, nor would UK want that. Both these countries would never want that. The reason for that is, if these countries unite, if Pakistan and India unites, then the major threat would be with USA, because when partition took place, when UK left India, right, when the Britishers left India, Indians remember that, and that would be a major problem if Pakistan and India unites. Then
yeah. Well, we see India and Pakistan both have refused to join the proxy war in Ukraine. Like they both, I think, push for a peaceful resolution there. And I think these multipolar institutions like the BRICS have been really important for hopefully bringing down tensions between countries like China and India And
Yeah, you are going
hopefully,
very quickly here on these topics, right? I've written this down. And actually, I wanted to start this by saying that this BRICS question, USA, and I think we should start talking about this a lot. USA owes $34 trillion of debt, $34 trillion of national debt. And they cannot be questioned. And they say because the federal prints the money, so nobody can question them. They can just generate money how much they like, and they bully other countries. They bully other countries, with all their petrodollars and all these kind of things. With this,
I think, we were just mentioning that with the BRICS. I mean, the petrodollar has been so important historically with the U.S. with the deals it's had with the Gulf kingdoms and with Saudi Arabia. And I think one thing I read recently was how China had worked to create like peace diplomatic overtures between Riyadh and Tehran, which is like so important because a lot of the conflicts historically in the Middle East, kind of underneath the surface, the tension, that kind of miniature Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia has been a big driver of conflict. So these new multipolar, initiatives are so important. And I think, you talked about the petrodollar and U.S. debt. The U.S. is also, it's such a, it's not really a country like other countries around the world. It's an empire, right? It has hundreds of bases all around the world. I mean, if you go to places like the Caribbean, a lot of the police officers, they actually get paychecks from like the DEA, different U.S. agencies, where their paychecks they get from U.S. agencies will be more than the local government pays them. So just the footprint of U.S. power across the globe is like unparalleled in history by an order of magnitude.
And isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting how much the USA government says that what big a threat Iran is if Iran has nuclear power? But the major issue is that the major threat the world faces is with USA having nuclear powers, right? Because right now on this Palestine issue and the Gaza issue, the major threat, USA can do a lot of things out of desperation because Netanyahu, I believe, will go as far as Jerusalem because these are very massive questions. And I'll they are getting all the help. Netanyahu is getting help from America. And America can go as far as even threatening other countries with nuclear weaponry. What do you have to say about that?
There's a lot of points there, and just to close out our previous points too. I mean, while the U.S. is this world empire, it's also trying to hold on to this position as we go through this era, what I call transnational capitalism, or the rise of a transnational capitalist class, where we see this integrations, cross-border mergers and acquisitions and investment flows, and the global economy is
the elites, the bureaucrats. I read this. The technocrats and the higher echelons all together.
It's become so much more functionally integrated across borders as compared to earlier periods of capitalism, right? That Adam Smith or Marx or others or Gramsci were writing about earlier in the 19th and 20th centuries. So we were really, we're in some ways we're living through a really fascinating time right now. Just with the rise of AI. What do you think what AI can do with astronomy and all these new tools that are coming about, and the increase in productivity and technological advancements? But then, at the same hand, how can these things be used for different repressive and coercive and monitoring? There's so many ways that they can be used. But on your point in regards to wait, sorry, what was the point in your last question?
Nuclear energy, nuclear power.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nuclear power. On the nuclear power question, the question I would like to
with Israel.
If I can ask it in a different way, would be that America likes to put a check and balance on other countries. They pulled away from the Iran nuclear deal and all these kind of things. But the thing is, they believe that they can use this whenever they like. They can use it out of desperation to maintain their global dictatorship, to maintain their hegemony, right? So how can we challenge? And this question I've been asking a lot of people, that how can we challenge these military elites? Because you mentioned about this transnational capitalist class, this capitalism, and I like to use the word oligarchic capitalism, but I like to suggest another word, oligarchic militant capitalism, because we have the higher elites in the politicians, and then we have the higher elites in the military, and both of them are connected. And the thing is, the button on the nuclear power, a lot of CIA intelligence, US Army chiefs, all these people are interconnected on these elements. So how can we develop sort of, because in this current times, we have actually won the media warfare, and we can congratulate each other. We have actually won the media warfare, because never has the narrative been so much against America that in this time on the Gaza issue. But the thing is now, militarily, how can we challenge them militarily?
You're talking about in Gaza specifically?
Gaza
I mean,
specifically,
that's a tough
Russia,
one because,
Russia and
yeah,
China.
I mean, that's a tough one because this is the world empire with the military
Yeah,
infrastructure.
but this is the question.
Yeah, I mean, really only, I mean, I think the only countries that the US really fears are probably China and Russia, countries that are like, you know, have significant military capabilities, and that they, you know, only push them so far. I think a key thing is international law, the United Nations, the different you know, charters around defending sovereignty. I think we see some of, like, here in Netherlands, where I am right now, you know, Netherlands had filed, or sorry, Nicaragua filed a case against Germany for supporting apartheid Israel in its genocide. And so, you know, different countries around the world, I think, need to step up and work together, and, you know, using different international legal tools and what have you. And I think, you know, domestically, people educating themselves about recent history, and also, you know, learning about the, you know, anti-war movement in the United States. The US isn't just, you know, Bill Gates and Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken. There are, you know, it's a lot of people in the country, and a lot of really brave organizations and history. I mean, when you asked the question earlier about academia, and I don't really think, I mean, academia can be important launching point for different struggles, and we see pro-Palestinian activists in universities in Europe and North America, you know, getting arrested in mass, and of course these are all very important in mobilizing and popular education and putting pressure. But at the same time, I don't think you can really change, like, the political scene of a country and rearrange things just through sort of like academia and those sort of circles. You know, you need grassroots political momentum, you know, and training and education. So it has to be, I think academia has its limitations, you know?
Yeah, I think this is a very big question, because I've also gotten a bit privileged of probably in future talking to Professor Norman Finkelstein as well, and he is, you know, one of my childhood heroes as well, because he is one of those academics. He's one of those academics who have actually shown us that if you remain true to academia for a longer duration, and you can change the narrative in the end. If there were not people like Professor Norman Finkelstein, I don't think we would have ever been successful in officiating this word of genocide on Israel, right? Because of the works of these people, Operation Protective Edge. These people continuously wrote about these things. The problem I see is, again, you wrote and you mentioned this, that the USA is a very advanced capitalist state. I like to use the word oligarchy capitalist state. And this ideology is transferred into the academic institutions, not just America, even in our country, in Pakistan as well, in all the countries. And I myself, you know, just like you shout at George W. Bush, I also do that. So we share this. Yeah, I also, you know, like to challenge the status quo.
US academia, just sorry to cut you off, US academia has a huge influence on academia around the world, because, you know, how you get raises and hired, you know, it's all depends on where you went to school and where you get your grants and what journals you get published in. So there's this whole sort of like academic hierarchy, right? And it's and the Western, you know, the sort of Anglo-American, the universities in these countries are always ranked at the top. They have the most resources, the money put in. There's like 2 or 3 universities in the US that get the chunk of the national security. I mean, this giant funds come out of Washington. do all sorts of studies geared towards corporate plundering around the world and all sorts of military and high-tech research and things that are tied into big capital. But yeah, it influences academics around the world. Like you have American liberal diversity trainers going and like working in other countries, and you see a sort of you see alteration or movement in different academic circles stepping in line with what's popular in the United States. It's almost like sort of cultural hegemony, and how different cultural traits spread around the world, or things that come out of Hollywood, that influences entertainment in other countries too. So
Yeah,
I don't
would
want
say,
to just
yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, I would say that, again, when we mention academia, ideology is very important, right? And
Yeah.
the moral legitimacy, we say the America and major parts of the world, because they have become so much capitalist, their mindset have become so much oligarchic capitalist, they have lost the moral legitimacy in the world, right? This is what we argue. This is what we as academics can offer to the world, that to restore the moral legitimacy in this world. So we say, and I was actually reading that, I asked you this question, that we see a decline in power of academics, particularly in influencing the ruling elite in decision making. We've seen how ruling elite deals with academics, like the recent ousting of presidents in Harvard, Penn, MIT. How do we reclaim our worth? And you gave a very good reply that many students have protested and mobilized, including some staff. Most of the strongly anti-imperialist academics I know have been fired or quit, or they have found other careers. The few that remain only can survive as non-tenured, temporary adjunct professors. I myself quit academia. Then you mentioned about this, and you mentioned about a capitalist state. The thing is, there is a culture, and I myself, challenge this in my country. There is a culture of worshipping money and worshipping chairs among the academia circle as well, because they worship, their higher politicians. They think they control all the budgets. When those people in academia think that the politicians control all the budget, then money is everything for them. Yeah, chairs are everything for them. Designations.
And there's I agree with you. And there are certain sacred cows that can't be touched, right? Like I know, for example, in India, like you can't talk about Kashmir. There's a lot of things you can talk about, but you can never talk. Like if you talk about Kashmir,
we'll talk about it. We'll talk about
these things, right? Like in the U.S. and in a lot of places, you can talk about things like racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia. You can talk, or in Western Europe, these sorts of things can be studied. Although they push against different heterodox radical approaches. I mean, there are scholars, Foucauldians or Marxists or different people that have a radical understanding of different things. But I think the sacred cow really here in the West is talking about NATO or a U.S. war. That's just my experience, at least, that these sorts of things, like, for example, if you wanted to get money to study the civilian impact of the NATO bombing campaign on Libya, or if you wanted to look at the impact of spent uranium shells that were shot in Iraq by the U.S. military, or the impact of, I don't know, European Union sanctions on Venezuela, on its cutting off from financial interactions, and its impact on like medical, facilities, or being blocked from buying different technologies. If you try to look at things like that, there's no interest in it. And if you do try to do something like it, people look at you like you're an alien, and why would you want to study something like that? And so this isn't to say that we shouldn't look at things like caste or race or homophobia or these sorts of things, but I think you have to look at the world in its totality instead of dividing it up into all these little separate identifiers that you just spend your life studying that one thing. I think you have to look at the world in its totality, and you also have to be open to reassessing what you think, because things can change. Do you know what I mean? You have to be, and that's hard to do because we can kind of fossilize or get stuck in our ways, in our thinking, and kind of fight against sectarianism, because we can really break up into all these little groups and then not be open to
collaboration
working
and
with
coordination
outside. Like in the U.S., for example, last year there was a rally called Rage Against the War Machine, where for the first time in my lifetime, you had groups on the right, the left, the center, libertarian groups, socialist, communist groups, but also more conservative groups like libertarian, Republicans. But they were all groups that are against war, and they all and some populist type, yeah, and they all came together and had a rally, and it was like it was really attacked, and this sort of mainstream media, some of the smaller Trotskyist groups and kind of academic sectarian groups really attacked it. But I thought, anything that can get people talking and trying to stop what could be World War III and extinction of our species, how could you oppose that? So yeah, that's my general thinking on that.
Yeah, and I really like one of your comments on this when you mentioned that popular movements need to be based in communities with people from different generations and backgrounds. Those things become a bigger narrative, because not just in institutions. And I also like to spread this message that we don't only need to win these mini wars in the institutional level, but also in our homes as well, because our houses is where all our ideologies develop, and our all our backgrounds and all these kind of things develop. So yeah, this was, I think, one of your best points for me, that popular movements need to be based on your homes as well, with different backgrounds and generations as well, right?
Yeah.
Just a couple of more questions I'd like to ask, and then we can probably call it off.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier about a multipolar. This is a very important point, multipolar world, because USA doesn't like that. America doesn't like that. America wants all the power by themselves. So the thing, the context of BRICS, when I asked you about BRICS, was specifically for this thing. Imagine that there are 5 or 6 countries, and they say that they don't want to deal with the dollar, because BRICS is coming up with this idea. They are gathering all the developing nations with them, and they are saying, okay, we don't need all the kind of trading from the American part of the world or from Africa. Asia can have their own trading partners, and we can have our own economy. So how do you see this kind of a world where we can sort of exclude ourselves from the American dollar, and because Pakistan recently bought oil from Russia, and they paid in Chinese yuan, not even in Russian money, in Chinese yuan, right? So how do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, I think it has yet to be seen how it will all play out and develop, but I think it's kind of like, I don't think it can be stopped, these developments, because there's just too many people around the world and institutions that aren't run out of Washington, right? So I think it is.
But the tide is
changing. This will play out. What did you say?
The tide is changing, because United Nations, I think you rightly said, Gaza and Yemenis have done a terrific job. Even United Nations, their whole mindset has changed. We have first time witnessed it, right?
Well, the United Nations also has its own sanction regimes that have been really damaging to a lot of countries too. So, the Security Council the United Nations is not exactly democratic on a global level, right? It comes out of particular historical context, how it was developed, but at the same time, it's one of the only things there where all, brings all countries of the world together. So it's the only thing permanent is change, right? Reality is contradictory. So there's no end point in the future. This is, everything is open to constant things can be defeated and then reignited, and so you can't think of an end point in history. That's the way I look at it. But I think for me, a lot of the things that I'm interested in also right now is, I think I mentioned before, with astronomy. I think it's so fascinating. For example, India has this very, they just had the mission to the moon, the James Webb telescope that I think is mainly funded out of the US. But there's a lot of, I would rather the United States spend money on, building up good infrastructure and a healthy society, and instead of doing wars around the world, I would rather spend money on, studying the universe, or colonizing another planet.
That's brilliant. Because I myself right now, also think across those lines. And I these days think about how intriguing even the cell is, right? Because we say that a silicon chip possesses 64 GB data, but a cell has, DNA, and how does that DNA extrapolate 20 years to become? How does it knows that? So I also, promote research, and we share that in common, right?
Yeah. So there's just so many better things in life that we could be spending our time on and enjoying rather than just constantly repeating these same things. And I think in the US a lot of people are really sick of the wars. I mean, we have our two political parties that are so heavily, just financed by the military industrial complex and put out policies to enrich them.
And isn't it sort of farcical? And I sometimes think about it that the America became a superpower when they had all these kind of liberal narratives to begin. And you guys talked about this that now it is changing to neoliberalization. I like to call neoliberal fascism. But they began their founding fathers like George Washington, Abraham. They were a moderate nation, right? That's why they gathered support from even the Middle East, even other countries, and they defeated Russia as well, and even the major powers. And how farcical is it that Russia and China are looking as moderate nations now? Middle East is looking as moderate. Al Jazeera is a moderate news channel, right?
I mean, liberalism has its roots, right, out of coming out of what they call the European Enlightenment and early colonialism and the Industrial Revolution and the creation of race, where prior to like the 1400s, prior to the 15th, 16th century, there was no, you can't, when you look in old manuscripts and things, they don't talk about black and white and brown and yellow. And so this understanding around race was really constructed during the rise of liberalism and capitalism and dividing people up into different groups to be ruled and subjugated. And I think, and just across the sphere, you see a sort of a solidification of a lot of things. I mean, even around organized religion, like if you look at religion in different parts of the world, there were a lot less, there was a lot more variability and kind of local traits and things when you look at our ancestors and culturally and religiously. So things became a lot more kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of solidified around centers of power, over recent history. And we'll see what happens over, the coming decades and century with AI. I mean, maybe SETI will find a techno signature from another planet. Who knows what's going to happen over our lifetime? We could have some really fascinating things happen over the next 20, 30, 40 years.
AI is fascinating, no doubt, but I think primary research is also very fascinating, and AI can never match that. Primary source.
I agree. Yeah.
And lastly, I would like to tell a very important thing, my sort of thesis, because why this Palestine issue is so important. Jerusalem is so important. Actually, if you look at the history of Jerusalem, it has always been the region of wars and conflicts, historically speaking.
You're talking about the Middle East or West Asia?
Yeah, Palestine, the capital of
yeah.
So the reason why America is so much influenced on it is because there have been only two civilizations that have actually challenged America in the past. One has been the Russians, the Soviets, and the other have been the Muslim civilization. Because Americans, if you trace back their historical background, they were Romans and all these kind of so Muslims defeated them at that time. So they always have this fear of Muslims will capture us, this region, and so they have this historical significance attached as well. That's why they go so much blatantly on Jerusalem and help.
Interesting. I mean, I think West Asia is such a strategic location globally with supply chains and resource extraction around petroleum and just its location on the planet. It's like it's vital. And so I think and you have this long history going back to the Crusades and conflict between the West but also a lot of interaction and trade and arts and literature. And so it's a very fascinating history, and the last few decades have been so sad. You know, the project for a new American century, how it played out with all the neoconservative war strategists in the Middle East, and just devastated so many people's lives through these different wars. I hope that things can really turn around. I think what Yemen has been able to do
Yep.
to the global shipping lanes and
Yeah.
in support of Gaza has been amazing.
Inspirational. Professor Norman Finkelstein says that Yemen has actually said that there will be no business as usual. He uses that word. There will be no business as usual until the issue of Palestine and Gaza is resolved. He used very beautiful language. And this meeting is ending.
Yeah, or we can talk another time. I would just close with saying the new study put out by the Lancet Medical Journal, I think they're saying that they think 180,000 people have died in Gaza, not the 30,000 number that we kept hearing throughout the years. So it's something that everyone has to really stand up for and unify on, and we need to bring that violence to an end, you know?
Yeah. On Pakistan, I would just say that America is oscillating between Pakistan army and the Pakistan major political parties. Always do that. Let them both fight each other so that we can control them. You wrote about Haiti, exact same issue, right?
Yep. That's the plan around the planet. They keep repeating it, so it makes sense.
And with that, I think we can, and you know, really boosted my, interest in global politics. I'll thank you with that.